Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about histograms. Histograms are another way to visualize our data. In a lot of ways, histograms will look a lot like the bar graphs that we've created earlier. The really important difference is we usually will use bar graphs when talking about qualitative data, and we'll create histograms instead when dealing with quantitative data. As you will see, there will be a few important differences between a bar graph and a histogram, but generally speaking, when you're new to this, they look very, very similar. Just remember that what we'll use is bar graphs for qualitative data and histograms for quantitative data. All right, to fully introduce the idea of histograms, what we're going to do is do the work of creating a histogram given this set of data right here, which is the calories per serving of 40 popular breakfast foods. Importantly, I use serving in quotes here because I decided what I see on breakfast cereals as a serving size, I don't know if anyone, definitely not me, actually uses that. I use 50 grams, which is about a full bowl of cereal, which I think the average person uses. And you can see there's other things like bacon, oatmeal, yogurt, and other items on this list. Importantly, we're going to use a larger data set, so I'm not going to write these all out. I'm just going to use this projection from the computer to look at this data set. By the way, after we do this by hand and we introduce the idea of histograms, we're going to show you how to create a histogram using technology. Specifically, we're going to be using Google Sheets in this example. First of all, I just want to show you that not all the data is showing up right now. If we scroll down right here, we'll see that we have 40, it goes down to row 41, but it means we have 40 data points because the first row at the very top is the header where I've put the categories in each of these columns. We're currently sorting these in alphabetical order. We're going to talk about resorting these to make the work of creating the histogram easier in a second. What I would like to do is just to jump into the work of actually creating a histogram, because I really think, like many things that we've talked about already, seeing the final product will help you understand what we're actually doing. I'll talk about those details as we go. But remember, a histogram really is the same as a bar graph. The important thing here is we're definitely not going to create 40 separate bars for this data right here. What we're going to do are group these breakfast foods into classes, and I want to talk about how I'm going to do that. First, in the work of creating a histogram, what I need to do is get an idea of the range of values I am dealing with right here. Right now, my data is organized by alphabetical order in that breakfast food column. What I'm going to do now in Google Sheets, I want to show you how to reorganize or resort this data from lowest to highest value. It doesn't matter if I do lowest to highest or highest to lowest. Again, all I'm really trying to do right now is get an idea of the lowest value and the highest data value. So what I'm going to do first here is I'm going to select all of this data. So I'm just going to pull and drag until I get all of this data selected. Now that I have it all selected, what I'm going to do is click on data, and I'm going to sort range. So sort range right here. And when I select sort range, what I'm going to do is advanced range sorting options. And importantly here, because of the way I created this data set, I put a header at the top naming each of these columns. So I'm going to say data has a header row, and then I'm going to sort not by the breakfast food, but by the calorie column. And I'm going to sort A to Z. Numerically, this will be lowest to greatest. So if I hit sort right here, what you'll see is I have the exact same data set, but now instead what I have is everything organized by the lowest number calories, to the highest calories. Lowest on this list are our 2 scrambled eggs. And then if we scroll down here, the most calories are with, unfortunately, waffles with butter and syrup, which are definitely the best, but they are the most calories at 290. So our maximum value in this data set is 290, and our minimum data set, our minimum value in this data set is 140. So this is the first important thing that we're doing with our data. What we're going to do now is we're going to separate all of these breakfast foods and put them in buckets or classes of equal width. So the important work now is to figure out how many classes we want and what is their width. There's no magic to this. This is really important. I hope that you see through this process. what I'm going to choose is a reasonable number of these buckets or these classes to use. And really based on that, we're going to determine a class width. Generally speaking, just so you know, we generally will choose at least 5 of these classes or buckets to put this data into, and up to 20. Really less than 5 will not give us much information, and more than 20 kind of clutters the information too much. Because again, what we're going to do with these 40 breakfast foods is we want to put these in different categories, really kind of in the same way we had with qualitative data. We're creating these categories with this quantitative data so we can get a really accurate visual representation of the spread of data or the location and skewness of this data. All right, so what I want to do next is decide on my class width. The way that we do this is we're going to take the span of this range right here. So this is from 140, to 290, but I'm going to take 290 minus 140. This will output how large of a span my data set covers. And I'm going to divide it by a number of classes. So this is the span. This comes directly from this range right here. This class width, I'm going to divide by the number of classes I'm going to choose. And again, there's really no magical answer for how you do this. It really depends on the context and how you're trying to kind of with the breadth and how much detail you want to give to these categories. I've spent a little bit of time with this data, and there's a special number that I like to use, and you'll see when I create this histogram by hand. If I'm creating it by hand and I want it to be really nice and accurate, especially without kind of nice graph paper, a number that I often will choose that's in that 5 to 20 range right there is I'll choose 8 classes. If at this point you're still confused on the word classes here, don't worry, that's really normal. It'll be clear when I create my frequency table in a second what these mean. But these are these buckets or categories that I'm going to lump this information into. But anyways, what I'm going to take is the range or the span of my range right here from 290 minus 140. That's the width of the range. And I'm going to divide that by the number of classes. And when I put that in my calculator, what I got is 18.75. What this is a good estimation for the width of each of these categories I'm going to use. Though importantly, what I will almost always do, just because I don't want to be doing math with some crazy decimals the whole way, I'm going to round this up. So I'm going to round this up to 19. 19 is a nice number. I could choose something like 20, but importantly, you're going to see a number like 19, which is one less than a multiple of 10, will actually work out a bit easier because I can't have these overlapping classes. And again, stay with me. This will make a lot more sense in a second when I create my table. All right, now what we're going to do is create a frequency table based on these classes that I've created. And again, I've decided on a class width of 19. Here are my classes that span this range. What you will notice is that my range in these classes goes a little bit outside of the range of the data that I'm working with, and that is very common. And again, all I need to make sure is that all the data I have right here fits within the range or fits in one of these classes. I also want to point out something that I mentioned, and again, we won't do a lot of work of creating histograms. You should be able to do them. Importantly, hopefully through this, you'll understand what a histogram is telling you. But importantly, I said I'm going to choose 19. I rounded that up from 18.75. And I said, you might think that you want to use 20, like a nice like multiple of 10 like that of 20. So it's easy to create these groups. But importantly, these classes cannot overlap. Another piece of terminology that I want to add right now is that this class we'll call the 140 to 159 class. That's a span of 19, or it has a width of 19. Importantly, we would call 140 the lower class limit. We would call 159 the upper class limit. And again, if I chose 20 to be the width, this would be 140 to 160. And then this one would have to be 161. I couldn't make the upper class limit of 160 the same as this lower class limit of 160. Because if a data point had 160 calories, in this case right here, I wouldn't know which of these classes to put it in. But now all the work I need to do is to count the frequency within each of these classes that I've created, or these buckets that I'm putting this data into. I won't show all this work because it's going to be pretty boring to watch me to count through these, but I just want to talk about a few of these. For instance, from 140 to 159, I have these 3 right here. So my count for that class is 3. And then I'll do one more from 160 to 179. What I have are these 2 right here, the 2 of 177. So I have 2 of these. What I'm going to do right now is off camera, put the frequency for each of these classes. Again, if you have a data set that you're creating a histogram for, I highly recommend that you sort by that column of the data. It makes it so much easier. All I need to do now is just figure out, again, how many of these values are between 180 and 199. And for all of these classes, back in 1 second with my completed frequency table. All right, now I've created my frequency table. That's really most of the work. Now what I'm going to do is create what's going to look a lot like a bar graph. I want to make it very important at this point. The important difference when you're looking at a histogram versus a bar graph is the fact that the bars, or these little rectangles that are representing each category, need to be touching when you create a histogram and need to be separate when you create a bar graph. All right, let's now do the work of creating this histogram. I said earlier that I chose 8 of these classes for a reason. I just want to show you that. Hopefully I can do this pretty well. It's hard to do this on something that's not graph paper. I chose 8 because it's 2 to the 3rd power. You're going to see how that works in a second, and you don't need to know that mathematical concept. But what it is, it's going to make it a lot easier for me to create these evenly spaced categories without any kind of really accurate measurements. So first of all, this is my ending point. This is going to be 0 in this, or the lower limit of this first class, I should say. I'm going to cut this in half. If I cut that in half, we now know I have 2 of these buckets or classes. I'm going to cut each of these in half. I then have 4 classes. And finally, and the reason I chose 8 is I'm going to cut each of these in half. And yeah, they're not perfect, but it's pretty good. I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fairly even spaced areas for these classes to reside in. I'm now just going to clean up my axes for a second, and we'll be back to put this data for this frequency table into the histogram. All right, I added all the basic details for my axes. I put each of my classes in each of these 8 categories. I also spanned my vertical axis here from 0 to 20 because I see 18 is the largest, and so 20 is just above that. I've then labeled 5, 10, and 15 to make things a little bit more accurate and clearer. And also, because I know some of these are less than 5, I put 1, 2, 3, 4 in below 5. All right, so let's do the work. This is really straightforward and should make a lot of sense. It's the same as a bar graph. The only difference is you'll see that we have these intervals instead of these disparate categories. This will help because there is a sense of least to greatest that's very different than we had with the qualitative data and the bar graphs we created. But let's just go right to it. In the 140 to 159 class, we had a frequency of 3. And so what I'm going to do is just create this bar in that class right there. Then from 160 to 179, I have 2. And so again, just adjacent to that bar, I'm going to put 2, which is right about there, just a little bit less than 3. Then from 180 to 199, well, I have a lot. That's 18. 18 is somewhere right about there, a little bit less than 20. I apologize if that doesn't look perfect, but I am writing on a piece of plexiglass without any grid paper. It makes it very tough. But anyways, that's pretty good. A little bit misshapen bar there, but I think we can appreciate that looks just fine. From 200 to 219, that is a value of 11, which is somewhere right about there. So there's that bar. From 220 to 239, I have 4, which is right about there visually. From 240 to 259, I just have 1, so that's a very small little bar here. Interestingly, from 260 to 279, I have 0, so I'm just going to leave that blank there. And then I see that I have 1. I think that was the waffles with the butter and syrup, and really unfortunate that it's an outlier out there having so many calories because it's really so good. Though if we're honest to ourselves, when we eat a couple of waffles or pancakes with way too much syrup, we probably don't feel well. It's because it's way more calories, a ton of sugar. But I digress. This has nothing to do with the actual food we're eating for breakfast. We just want to illuminate this concept of histograms. Again, just to backtrack, talk about how I did this, and then I want to spend a second and show you how you can create something like this on Google Sheets. First and foremost, we did the work of finding the class width. How we did that was took the minimum and maximum value in our data set. We found this range that was 140 to 290. Then what we did was took the span of that, or that width of the range, from 290 minus 140, and we divided it by the number of classes we were looking for. Then we had the idea of the class width. When we did that division, we actually got 18.75. I chose to use 19, because if I use one number less than a multiple of 10, actually these classes work really well. It's not always going to work like that. It depends on the numbers you're dealing with. But in this case, that worked beautifully. Then all I need to do is look at my data, take all of that raw data and create this frequency table based on these classes. These classes have a width of 19. I would say the lower class limit for the first class is 140. The upper class limit is 159. I then create a table a lot like a bar graph, except that I am actually adjoining each of these intervals or these widths of these classes when I create this. And finally to say, when I look at this, we haven't talked about skewness quite yet, but you'll see this gives me a really good idea of where the data is located, because again, these categories or classes that I've created are organized in some way. There's an order to this from least to greatest, which actually now gives me an idea of this concept of skew, which we'll talk about shortly. The reality is we won't create these histograms by hand very often because we're going to have large data sets and we have technology. I just want to show you very quickly how we can create a histogram with Google Sheets. So first thing I need to do is I'm going to select the data that I want to create with the histogram, or I want to create a histogram from, excuse me. I don't select my A column here. I'm only going to select this raw data. And so I'm going to select all of this from the 140 down to the 290. Once I've selected that, I'm going to click on Insert, and I'm going to insert a chart. And normally, actually, Google Sheets will know what I'm trying to do right here. So if I hit Chart, it will create a histogram. And I just want to say we might want to do some work of customizing this data or the chart with the class width. So if I hit Customize, and I'm going to go to histogram, what I'm going to do is choose the bucket size. This is their word for the class width. And let's see what we got. I'll choose 25. And you can see very quickly, this creates a nice histogram. I can choose different bucket sizes if I want to change the width of these classes.